Welcome back to the Small Business Mindset. As we wrap up this last year of 2022, I want to have a conversation with all of you about change and opportunities that surround themselves with the change that happens normally in our lives with any economy. And I know this year and the last year has been a little tumultuous with interest rates going up and going down and inflation going up and prices going up. And as I know many of you are experiencing right now, travel plans have put the kibosh on that. So change is ever present in our lives, regardless of where we work, how we work, where our customer base lies, and what the economy is doing. I hope to give you a little bit of sense of calm during this time of change, because change is ever present. So I'm going to refer to something in my own life with real estate market, because I think real estate markets are a great precursor to finding out what's happening in the economy and what's happening in the business world. As we've experienced here in the last few years, we had rock bottom low interest rates, meaning you could buy a house or buy a building or buy a car or get credit for really, really low rates, which helps people sometimes afford a greater purchase than they normally would. So for example, if your interest rates were hovering around 3% or less, you could afford to buy a larger home because those mortgage payments based into the interest rate would calculate to something that's a little more manageable. As we are now seeing interest rates creep up quite a bit, and maybe creep isn't the right word, fly up quite a bit. So now we're seeing interest rates 6, 7, 8%, depending on your credit, depending on the term, depending on how the loan is put together. That changes things a little bit. And I think people are feeling the squeeze. When in reality, if we look over time, and a lot of times history tells us the economic factors that play into all of this and what's the true normal, right? I mean, what feels normal? And I'm sure anyone in your life that has purchased a home or started a business or, bought something on credit can tell you a story, and I have my own too, as far as what those interest rates mean to them. So here's my story. When my husband and I first got married, it was 23 years ago. So this was in the summer of 1999. Now, granted, we had not bought a house before. We were brand new to home buying. Our credit was okay, but we were, getting out of college and dealing with student loans and establishing our credit, and didn't have, a really good solid footing. We didn't have a ton of money in savings. So we were a young, early buyer pool. Our interest rates on our first home was 7%. And actually in that time, in the late 1990s, that was actually decent. It was average. It wasn't amazing, but it wasn't awful. And that allowed us to purchase a home, and our home at the time was $80,000. Now that same home today, if I kind of go back and do a little market research, that same home might be on the market today for around $120,000 or $140,000. So not quite double in price, but pretty close. But we're looking at a time span of over 20 years. But at that time, if memory serves me right, that 7% loan we got on that $80,000 purchase, and we had a little bit of a down payment, probably not more than 3 to 5%. Our monthly payments were around $600 to $650 a month. Now that didn't include taxes, insurance, maintenance, utilities, stuff like that. But just to kind of keep it simple, that's where we were at. Now, if I were to conversely come into that home and I got an amazing 3% rate, that would have allowed me to buy that same house. Or if I were to keep my payments the same, $600 to $650 a month, the value of the home or the property that I could have purchased at the time would have been significantly higher. And so you think about, values adjust with the market too. We look at a lot of supply and demand. And I know the fear that exists in people right now is the unknown. What is the market going to do? Is right now we're still in a bit of a seller's market, and that applies to commercial real estate too. But as interest rates go up, as inflation goes up, what does that happen to the buyer's market? Well, really it adjusts the supply and demand factor. So as interest rates go up, people maybe are less anxious to take a hold of those lower rates because the size of the property they can afford has just shrunk a little bit. Not physically, but financially, because what that $650 payment, that my husband and I afforded 20 some years ago at 7%, is really the pocket of where they're looking at. So if they were looking at a larger, more expensive home to buy because interest rate was low, now maybe the price of the house has to come down, and thus the size of the house might have to come down. So their options might be a little more limited. So why am I telling you all this? Why is this important today? What does this apply to you? Maybe you're not in the market to buy a new house, or you're not in the market to buy a building for your business or expand. But I think what the story is that things change constantly. Things change constantly. And I want you to start looking at change as an opportunity. So one thing I want to ask you, if you're a business owner or you work within a business, how are you setting your business up to capitalize on those changes? We know interest rates have already gone up. How is that impacting your business? Is it impacting your business? What are your customer bases doing now that's different than they did before? I guarantee you, most people, if they're approaching the world with the unknown and feeling some fear and where they're headed next, what they're really looking for is guidance and advice and maybe an open conversation to help identify those weakness areas, those areas where they are feeling unsure. Are they unsure because maybe they haven't locked down a contract yet that guarantees them a certain workflow? Are they unsure because they don't know what their hiring strategy looks like? Or maybe they're worried that they have some team members that might retire early. I don't know. How are they setting themselves up to capitalize on the opportunity? And what I mean capitalize is that if you set yourself up with plan A, plan B, plan C, and starting to turn the tides and figuring out, okay, how is change going to benefit me? How can I get out in front of it? Now, I'm sure all of us would have loved to wave a magic wand and go back in time and say, gosh, if I would have known that Yahoo or Google or one of those internet giants was going to be such the big thing when the internet was launched back in the 90s, gosh, I could have capitalized on then. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about those futuristic thinking and doing that immense forecasting. But what I can tell you is start forecasting. Start looking at trends. Think about the type of business that you are in, whether you make a product or you sell a service. Think about your client base. And this is where we get down into the weeds with the data. This is the perfect time of year to do an analysis of your data for the year. In fact, do some data for the last 3 to 5 years. I think we need to go back a little bit farther than the start of COVID to really get some trends, because I feel like that COVID year, 2020, maybe even going into 2021, was a little different than a typical business year for our business. But what it did do is change the way people do business. So I think setting some trends and forecasting and really identifying what made your business thrive. I like to kind of take some time and analyze when we go back and look at economic adjustments, if I'm going to call it that. I'm going to say it's a bad thing. I'm going to call it an economic adjustment. When those economic adjustments happen, and typically financial forecasters like to say those economic adjustments happen every 10-ish years, sometimes a little longer, what can we learn from that? So if we go back to our last economic adjustment, I'm going to call it that now, back in 2008, 2009, when the housing market had a major crisis and our banks were in crisis and our economy was in crisis, what lessons did we learn from that? The businesses that I worked with at the time, and I was not yet in commercial real estate, I was in banking. One thing I noticed that a trend was very interesting. The companies that had set themselves up from the beginning and did a minimum of an annual analysis and did some forecasting. What worked well for us? What are our major sources of income? Where are our largest customer clusters coming from? The ones that truly identified those and had a great understanding of where the opportunity lied did fantastic. They weathered the storm through the economy. They probably reinvested in those areas that made them the most money. And when they came out the other side, they were a stronger company than they were before the economic period that happened that made people change the way they do business. So I'm going to ask you the same question now. If you look at all the lines of how you make money for your business, what do you do really, really well? And that's a question you should constantly ask yourself, just to touch base and kind of have some baseline. What is happening in your business that you do really well? What do your clients come to you for? What do they seek your advice on? Where is your value? Now, I know a competitive advantage is always something we should be mindful of in our industries, but sometimes competitive advantage comes from in the way you communicate. It comes from the way you show up. Comes from your response time. It comes from the way you're able to collaborate and bring people to the table and converge them in a way that makes opportunities happen. I want you to take that deep dive into your business right now. What better time than as we're coming to the beginning of the year, and make that a habit year to year. I think there's great ways to combat those unstable times in our economy and those unsure moments in our business and our world. The last thing I want to cover today that I think applies to anyone, whether you're in business or not, or you're just looking for this for a choice of, motivation in your life, it's the power of positivity. And I know, stick with me for a minute, but I think we are so inundated in the news sources or online media because people love drama and people love negative drama. If you can find a way, and this is a discipline only you can exercise for yourself. No one else is going to do it for you. No one else is going to put those filters on and put the rose-colored glasses on yourself. I know sometimes we talk about putting the oxygen mask on ourselves, but I'm going to say put those rose-colored glasses on yourself. I don't mean to be naive in the ways of the world, but I think if you limit the amount of negative rhetoric in your life, negative talk, people coming at you, even people that you're closest to, if they are putting negative stuff into the world and it comes at you, they might not tell you it to your face, but it comes at you because at night you're scrolling your social media feed and it's constantly there and it's in your face and it's somebody being victimized or it's somebody blaming something else. And I want you to ask yourself a few questions. First of all, is it true what they're saying? Does it apply to you at all? And is it helpful? Are they putting something out there because they need assistance with something and they're asking a question? Or are they trying to stir the pot and they're trying to get attention to themselves that isn't helpful to anybody? If you evaluate your life based on those factors, I think what you'll find is that the positivity elements of your life, of your business, of the world you surround yourself in will constantly multiply themselves. The more positive energy you put out there, the more positive energy you will receive back. And the more positive energy and opportunities you'll bring to yourself, your business, and your clients. So I hope you kick off this next year and wrap up 2022 with a great plan. Do some forecasting, dig deep, analyze the data, find out how to capitalize on the change that is here, is coming, and turn it into an opportunity.